Ladies and gentlemen, there are multiple storylines colliding inside the Cleveland Browns organization right now, and every single one of them demands honest examination and direct analysis, because taken individually each development carries significant weight, and taken together they paint a picture of a franchise that is simultaneously moving forward with clarity and purpose while also navigating internal tensions that have not yet been fully resolved and that deserve to be called exactly what they are rather than softened into something more comfortable and more palatable for an audience that deserves the unvarnished truth about what is happening with their football team. So let us go through all of it. Every layer. Every storyline. With the directness and the honesty that this moment requires. The Cleveland Browns drafted another quarterback. His name is Talon Green, and from the moment his selection became public, the narrative machinery in certain corners of Cleveland Browns media began spinning up its predictable engine, preparing to push the story that this new quarterback represents some kind of threat to Shedeur Sanders, some organizational hedge against the possibility that the young franchise signal caller might not be the answer this front office has publicly and repeatedly committed to building around. That narrative is wrong. It is not supported by the facts on the ground. And Todd Monken addressed it with a clarity and a directness that should have ended the conversation immediately, even though the Cleveland Browns media apparatus will almost certainly attempt to resurrect it anyway because manufactured quarterback controversy generates clicks and engagement in ways that honest organizational reporting simply does not. Monken made his position absolutely clear. Shedeur Sanders' reps will not be affected by the addition of Talon Green to this roster. Read that statement and understand what it means in practical football terms. The head coach of the Cleveland Browns stood in front of reporters and said explicitly that bringing in another quarterback does not change the opportunity structure for his franchise quarterback. Sanders will continue to receive the reps that reflect his status as the number one signal caller in this building. The developmental quarterback added through the draft will work within the system at the level appropriate for a player at his stage of development, which means he will not be taking time or opportunity away from the quarterback this coaching staff has identified as their starter and their future. That is transparent coaching leadership. That is a head coach refusing to allow organizational decisions made above his pay grade to create confusion about the direction he is building this offense and this team. Monken has been consistent in his commitment to Sanders throughout this entire process, from the mini-camp session where Sanders was first in 11-on-11 drills, to the helmet camera evaluation tool deployed to capture his decision-making in real time, to the confirmation that Sanders would be receiving more reps as the offseason program continued. Every single statement and every single structural decision Monken has made reflects a coach who knows who his quarterback is and who is building everything around that quarterback with genuine conviction. But here is where this story gets genuinely interesting and genuinely complicated, because the drafting of Talon Green did not happen in a vacuum, and the circumstances surrounding that decision reveal something about the internal dynamics of this organization that deserves honest acknowledgement rather than polite deflection. There is a growing sense, and this is not idle speculation but a reading of observable evidence and organizational behavior patterns, that owner Jimmy Haslam was the driving force behind the decision to draft another quarterback. Haslam has demonstrated throughout his tenure as Browns owner a persistent pattern of behavior around the quarterback position, a tendency to want to keep drafting quarterbacks, to maintain what he apparently views as necessary organizational depth or optionality at the most important position on the football field, regardless of whether that philosophy aligns with what his head coach is trying to build or what his franchise quarterback needs in terms of a stable and clearly defined competitive environment. This is not a new observation about Jimmy Haslam. Anyone who has followed the Cleveland Browns with honest attention over the past several years understands that the owner's relationship with the quarterback position has been one of the defining and most problematic recurring themes of his ownership tenure. Quarterbacks have come and gone with a frequency that reflects not a thoughtful and disciplined evaluation process but an organizational restlessness and an inability to commit fully and permanently to a direction without second-guessing at the moment something shinier appears on the horizon. And now, in the middle of what should be the clearest and most unified organizational moment this franchise has experienced in years, in the middle of a draft where Monken and Barry built a coherent and purposeful offensive infrastructure around Shedeur Sanders with pick after pick reflecting genuine strategic intention, another quarterback gets added to the roster. And the fingerprints on that decision appear to belong to the owner rather than the coaching staff. Todd Monken essentially said as much. Without naming names directly, without making the kind of explicit
some reps. But that doesn't mean he's getting the quality reps, okay?
Right.
That doesn't mean that he's competing for the starting job.
Similarly, how Gabriel's not really in this either.
Anyone that tells you that Taylen Green is coming in here competing for the starting job this year is being very disingenuous with you. They're gaslighting you. That's not what's going to happen. They're bringing him in. He's going to be an off-season arm. And then if they like what they see, they're going to keep him around. Andrew Berry said they like 3 quarterbacks on the active roster, 1 guy on the practice squad. Guess what? Taylen Green's going to be your practice squad quarterback. Your 3 on the active roster are the 3 guys they got now.
Public accusation that would create an irreparable breach in the organizational relationship, Monken communicated through his comments a clear message about the quarterback situation and about where the decision to add Green originated. He was drawing a line. He was protecting his franchise quarterback from a narrative that he understands will be weaponized by media voices who want to manufacture controversy where none genuinely exists. And in doing so, he was also subtly but unmistakably pushing back against an ownership impulse that threatens to introduce unnecessary noise into an environment that his quarterback needs to be as clean and as focused and as clearly defined as possible. That is a head coach standing up for his player and his vision in a situation where the organizational support for that vision is coming from a complicated and not entirely unified place. And it deserves recognition as exactly what it is. Now let us address the Dillon Gabriel situation, because it connects directly to the ownership dynamics we just discussed and reveals another layer of the internal tension that is operating within this franchise even as the public-facing draft narrative has been overwhelmingly positive and forward-looking. Reports had been circulating that Dillon Gabriel would be departing the Cleveland Browns, that his roster spot was not secure and that the organizational direction being set by Todd Monken's offensive philosophy and personnel preferences would not include Gabriel going forward. Those reports made football sense, because when you examine Gabriel honestly against the framework that Monken has established for how he runs an offense, when you look at the physical attributes and the skill profile that Monken's system historically rewards and prioritizes at the quarterback position, Gabriel does not check the boxes. He does not fit the profile in the way that Shedeur Sanders fits it, in the way that the kind of quarterback Monken wants to develop and deploy in his system needs to fit it. The size, the attributes, the operational characteristics that Monken's offense demands, Gabriel simply does not bring them in sufficient measure to justify the roster spot he is occupying. And yet Andrew Berry has dismissed the idea of releasing Gabriel. He is staying, at least for now. And the reason that decision appears to have been made over the objections or at least the preferences of the coaching staff points directly back to the owner. Jimmy Haslam likes quarterbacks. He likes having them on the roster. He likes the feeling of depth and optionality that multiple quarterback presences create, even when that depth does not serve the developmental environment of the franchise quarterback, even when it creates roster inefficiency and positional redundancy that consumes resources better deployed elsewhere, even when the head coach who is responsible for winning football games with these players would make a different decision if the choice were entirely his to make. This is a tension that matters. Not because it is likely to produce an immediate crisis or a dramatic public rupture, but because it represents a fundamental misalignment between ownership philosophy and coaching vision that, if left unaddressed and unresolved, tends to compound over time in ways that eventually produce exactly the kind of organizational dysfunction that Cleveland Browns fans have watched derail promising situations before they could fully develop. Monken needs clarity in his quarterback room. He needs Shedeur Sanders to operate in an environment where the competitive hierarchy is unambiguous, where the resources and the attention and the developmental infrastructure are concentrated on the player who is going to lead this offense rather than diffused across multiple quarterbacks who serve the owner's preference for depth more than they serve the coaching staff's vision for how to build a winning team. Every roster spot occupied by a quarterback who does not fit the system is a roster spot that could be occupied by a player who does, and in the compressed and fiercely competitive environment of an NFL roster, those spots matter. Now let us talk about Jerry Jeudy, because his situation has moved into its own distinct category of organizational tension and deserves direct examination without the softening that his status as a veteran receiver with a significant contract sometimes encourages from media voices reluctant to say the uncomfortable thing plainly. Jerry Jeudy is in the hot seat. That is the accurate and honest description of where he stands within this receiver room right now, and the reason he is in the hot seat is directly connected to everything the Cleveland Browns have done during this draft to build genuine depth and genuine competition at the receiver position. Casey Consumption drafted at 24.
He's almost thrown for 10,000 yards at the college level. So it's not like he hasn't, you haven't seen anything out of this guy. He's done a ton of things. And I was an anti-take a quarterback position at quarterback, at anywhere in the draft. And here's why. I thought Shedeur looked good enough where last year, and I thought his health and what he looked like in the first day of practice, and also with Deshaun Watson. Now, people lose their minds when you talk about, I sent out a tweet that Deshaun Watson looked good. I'm referring to his health. Has nothing to do with how he's going to play on Sunday or if he's going to be the starting quarterback. I thought his movement skills were very good. I thought the ball jumped off his hand. There's your veteran. So you have two projects already with Dylan and Shedeur. Then you got the backup possibly. He's going to be here. If that's going to be a 53-man spot, you got to utilize it, even if it's a backup. And so now you got Taylor Green. So now Taylor Green comes in and he gives you more than what Dylan Gabriel can give you right now. And I love Dylan Gabriel, but it's the reality of what this system is. He gives you the +1 in the run game. And people say, well, what is that? Well, right when he comes in, it's not gimmicky. The offensive line will block whatever they're blocking, especially down in the red zone, and he gives you the +1. The quarterback becomes the tailback becomes the fullback. Now you have an extra guy for the extra guy that the defense brings down in the box. He's 230 pounds. He runs 4.3. Now, once again, you can just create packages. It's not gimmicky. For me, gimmicky is when he comes in, the whole offense does different things. My selling point is this. If Todd Monken got the keys, we don't know if Todd Monken likes any of the three quarterbacks that are here. He will tell you that he does because that's his job as a head coach.
Right.
But he's been an offensive-minded guy, and maybe he wanted his guy to develop. And we don't know if he did or not, but maybe he wanted a guy that he thought he can kind of mold into what he wants. If you think about what he did, Stetson Bennett at Georgia, what he did with Lamar Jackson, with the Ravens. Now I'm biased because Lamar's my favorite player, but he took him from the best running quarterback in the NFL to a top 10 passer from the pocket, in my opinion. So maybe he sees some of that in Taylor Green, where I can mold this guy. He doesn't have to play right away. But then you also have all these movement quarterbacks, and I think of that as a coach. He's also a guy that can run your scout teams when you play the Ravens. He's also a guy, if you have a movement quarterback that you're going to play that week, he gives you that guy as you're developing him. So I thought it was a great pick. If it doesn't work out, who cares? It's a 6-rounder. But the traits are there, and then you go look at that production. So you got both, and that's what, last two drafts. Not only guys who are really potentially very good, but have been the best players on Saturday. I like the pick. He's got to protect the ball if he's ever going to see the field. But when you talk about physical tools, I think it's a great risk-reward there.
Denzel Boston drafted at 39. Tylan Wallace signed in free agency. Jamar Thrash brought back for additional depth. Isaiah Bond already on the roster and developing a working relationship with Shedeur Sanders through minicamp. And Judy himself was absent from voluntary minicamp activities, a decision that did not go unnoticed and that does not help his standing within an organization that is visibly and aggressively building the depth that makes any individual receiver's roster spot less secure than it might have been a year ago. The question surrounding Judy is not whether he has talent. He does. The question is whether he will produce at the level this organization needs from him, whether he will show up with the commitment and the engagement that a receiver in his position needs to demonstrate when genuine alternatives exist behind him and when the organization has made clear through its draft decisions that no roster spot is guaranteed regardless of contract size or previous reputation. Judy needs to make his money this year. He needs to show up, show out, and demonstrate that the investment Cleveland made in him when they acquired him was justified by what he produces on the field in a Browns uniform during the 2026 season. Because the honest assessment of his situation right now is that the organizational patience for underperformance or disengagement has likely been exhausted by the combination of his minicamp absence and the receiver room competition that now surrounds him on all sides. Talon Green, the newly drafted quarterback, has already spoken publicly about Shedeur Sanders and had nothing but praise to offer. Nothing. Not a competitive challenge, not a veiled suggestion that he sees himself as a genuine alternative for the starting role, not the kind of carefully ambiguous language that sometimes comes from young quarterbacks trying to establish themselves without alienating the veteran ahead of them. Pure, genuine, straightforward praise for the quarterback who holds the starting role and who Green himself apparently recognizes as the rightful occupant of that position. That is actually a healthy dynamic for a quarterback room to have. A developmental backup who respects the established hierarchy, who understands his role, who is not coming in with an inflated sense of his immediate competitive standing, is a player who can develop within the system without creating the kind of internal tension that some backup quarterback situations generate when the player in the secondary role is either openly or subtly positioning himself as a challenger to the starter's authority and standing within the building. Green's response to being drafted, his immediate public acknowledgement of Sanders' status and his expression of genuine admiration rather than competitive threat, suggests a player who understands exactly where he is in the organizational hierarchy and who is prepared to approach his development with the appropriate humility and patience that his situation demands. The challenge is that his very presence on this roster, regardless of how professionally and how graciously he conducts himself, was a decision made in a way that did not originate from the coaching staff's offensive construction vision. And that reality, that the owner's fingerprints are on a roster decision that the head coach had to address publicly and explicitly to prevent it from creating unnecessary narrative complications around his franchise quarterback, is the most telling and most important detail in this entire collection of developments. Cleveland is moving forward. The draft has produced genuine and meaningful improvements to the offensive infrastructure being built around Shedeur Sanders. Spencer Fano will protect his blind side. Casey Consumption and Denzel Boston will give him new receiving options with genuine capability. Joe Royer will provide a tight end dimension to the passing game that creates matchup problems defenses have to account for every week. The foundation is being built with real resources and real conviction. But the foundation has cracks. Ownership impulses that do not fully align with coaching vision. Roster decisions that introduce noise into an environment that needs clarity. Veterans whose commitment levels and competitive engagement remain questions rather than certainties. And a media apparatus that will predictably attempt to manufacture controversy around every organizational decision that can be framed as anything other than completely unified and unambiguous support for the franchise quarterback. Todd Monken knows all of this. He is navigating all of it with the kind of direct and transparent leadership that has characterized his approach throughout this process. He said clearly that Sanders' reps will not be affected. He pushed back against the narrative being constructed around Talon Green. He is protecting his quarterback from organizational noise that has nothing to do with football and everything to do with ownership dynamics that have complicated Cleveland's quarterback situation before and that have the potential to complicate it again if they are not managed with the same directness and clarity that Monken has demonstrated every time he has been given the opportunity to speak on the subject. Shedeur Sanders is the Cleveland Browns quarterback. That remains the truth. That remains the direction. And Todd Monken is making sure that everyone in and around this organization understands it completely and without reservation. The rest of Cleveland's organizational apparatus needs to align with that truth fully and finally. Because the 2026 season is coming, the foundation has been built, and the time for internal ambiguity and ownership-driven roster decisions that create unnecessary complications around the franchise quarterback is over. It is time for everyone in that building to get on the same page. Monken's page. Sanders' page. The page that the practice field and the draft board in every genuine football decision made during this offseason has already written clearly for anyone willing to read it honestly. That is the current state of the Cleveland Browns. Complex, promising, and not yet fully resolved. But pointed, unmistakably, in the right direction.